Good morning. It's good to see you. It's good to be back home. Last week I was down in Richmond leading a men's retreat with a congregation at the Three Chopped Road Church of Christ, and it was a wonderful time. But it's certainly good to be back home. In the lead up to Resurrection Sunday, which is just around the corner, hope you've got your white shoes and your white seersucker jacket. I guess we can wear it after that, right? In the lead up to that, we're doing a series called "Come and See," and I want to encourage you to invite your friends, not just Easter Sunday, but for this really what I think is a fantastic series of lessons. My great grandmother was called Annie America Grable, and she was born on a plantation in southwestern Virginia in the 1890s. As a teenager, though, she was part of the original, I guess the OG, original generation of pioneer settlers in the Indian Territory, Oklahoma Territory. And so that means that she traveled halfway across the country or the continent in a horse-drawn wagon. But by the time that she died, nearly a century later, she had flown on a passenger jet to Hawaii. She'd watched a man walk on the moon. My great-grandmother, she lived a very full and long life, and she died the way that most of us, I think, probably would like to hope to. She died quietly. She died peacefully. She was surrounded by family. Today, she's got nearly 200 descendants that are scattered all across the country on both coasts, and her name is still recalled by her great-great-great-grandchildren. Where do you think my youngest daughter got her name? Even though she died when I was very young, I do have a few memories of her, but her presence still lingered in our family, especially in her sayings. One of her favorites was this: always wear clean underwear. You never know when the ambulance will have to pick you up. Why do we chuckle at that? Well, because underneath that humor, there's some truth, isn't there? We care about how we go out. We care about our dignity, even in death. We want to finish well what we've started, and I think most of us would probably like to leave this world gracefully and gallantly, like a deer jumping over a fence from one field into another, safe in the arms of Jesus. Frances Hobbs was wife of the very influential Baptist preacher Herschel Hobbs. She faced a terminal cancer diagnosis. And after a very long, hard-fought battle with disease, the treatments finally failed. And in her final moments, she asked her husband what she should expect in death. And Herschel, he replied tenderly to her, "Well, honey, I've not experienced it. But I do know this: Jesus promised He would come again and receive us unto Himself, so I'm going to hold your hand on this side, and I won't let go until Jesus takes your hand on the other side." If I took a poll of every audience I've ever spoken before, I think almost unanimously every person would say something like that is how they would want to go out, with the crease of a smile left on their lips. We don't want our work to be left undone. We don't want to be remembered as a punchline. We want that dash on our gravestone between the year of our birth and the year of our death to count for something. And because we all have that sort of expectation of dying and going to rest with our fathers, as it so often says in the Bible about righteous kings, that's what makes certain deaths seem so tragic to us. Not just because of the loss, but because of how it happened. Take David Carradine, for instance. He was a martial arts actor who starred in Kung Fu back in the 1970s. But then in the year 2009, he died alone in a hotel room in Bangkok under very salacious, humiliating circumstances. I won't even share the details. But put it this way: nobody talked about his acting talent after that. Or Elvis Presley, right? The king of rock and roll. At the height of his fame, he was selling out stadiums. He was topping the charts. He was shaking his hips on the Ed Sullivan Show. But in 1977, he died slumped over in his bathroom at Graceland Palace in Memphis. Toxicology report from the coroner's office, 2 miles long. Not just was he gone ahead of his time, he was diminished, removed from that glittering legend. That's what young people most remembered about the oldies legend, right? The punchline, the king died on the throne. And then there are deaths that are so absurd, they almost seem fictional. They say Jack Daniels, the founding distiller and namesake of the whiskey company, died because he got an infection in his toe. One morning he came into the office early, and he tried to open up his safe, but he couldn't remember the combination. Maybe he was a little hungover, and he got frustrated, and he kicked the solid iron safe in anger, and he busted his toe. The wound got infected. It spread and eventually led to sepsis. That's what killed him. His life, became a cautionary tale. Don't go to work early. And don't kick things made out of steel. Or the burglar who got caught in a chimney and died, or the would-be YouTube influencer who fell off a cliff filming a stunt, not going out in a blaze of glory, not fighting a war, just a misplaced step after chasing clicks. Some deaths are like that. They stick with you like a Southern Gothic tall tale. And so it's no mystery. We want something better. We imagine for ourselves. We want to go out in glory. We want to live, and we want to die with meaning. And that's exactly what makes the death of Jesus so jarring. Or maybe we don't find it jarring. Maybe that's part of the problem. That we're so accustomed to thinking of the glory of the cross that we often forget how grotesque it is. We chisel it into gravestones. We forge it in gold to wear around our necks. We hang it reverently on the wall and surround it with roses. Ever since the day of Constantine, it's been emblazoned on battle shields. But before the cross ever crowned a cathedral, it was meant to humiliate a man. Before it adorned altars, it defiled bodies. And before it became the most treasured of symbols, it was a crude punchline, the sort of thing that you whispered with a wince or a sneer in polite Roman society. And so to cling, as we do, to the old rugged cross, without first recognizing the scandal, is to miss the shock, the offense, the sheer absurdity of it. If we jump straight to theological explanations, to atonement theories and sacrificial systems, without first letting the rawness of the thing confront us, I think we clean up the blood too quickly from Golgotha. After all, the first followers of Jesus, they didn't see the cross. They didn't understand the cross as a carefully constructed doctrine. They saw it for what it was, a Roman torture rack, a slave's death. A place where power stripped love bare and spat in its face. The mystery, you see, is not that we eventually made meaning of it. The mystery is that God was already there, turning mockery into majesty. Because he didn't die with dignity. He didn't die at home in a soft bed surrounded by friends. He didn't even die with the civil rights protections of the Eighth Amendment. His death wasn't peaceful. It wasn't private. It was designed intentionally to shame him and the morons who called him master. It was public. It was political. It was personal. It reminds me of Emmett Till, 14-year-old black boy from Chicago, lynched in Mississippi in 1955 for allegedly whistling at a white woman. Days later, her husband and her half-brother kidnapped him, beat him, mutilated him, dumped his body in the Tallahatchie River with a cotton gin fan tied around his neck, held on with barbed wire. At the funeral, Emmett's mother, Mamie, she insisted on an open casket. "I want the world to see what they did to my boy," she said. That's the kind of death that Christians proclaim their Lord died. Not noble, not dignified, but humiliating, public, exposed, executed like a criminal. They even did it to him in front of his mama. The cross, you see, it wasn't just a method of execution, it was a statement. Cicero, the Roman rhetorician, he called it the most cruel and disgusting penalty. And he insisted that the word cross, should not be spoken in polite company. You don't say that sort of language in front of women and children. Crucifixion was obscene. It wasn't just about death, it was about degradation, because the goal, it wasn't just to kill, but to erase the victim's name and memory. Quick question. Besides Jesus of Nazareth, name somebody else who was crucified. If you say Spartacus, you're wrong. Stanley Kubrick took the creative license there. The real Spartacus died in battle, but Kubrick, he knew the power of the Christian symbol, and that's why he depicted Charlton Heston as a crucified hero. Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag archipelago, he wrote about the Soviet torturers he had in the Gulag who didn't just torment the body, they sought to erase the person. Prisoners were bound in these contorted positions. They were denied warmth and speech and even the ability to crawl up in the fetal position. The point wasn't just to make them hurt, it was the humanization. That's what the cross is. It's Rome's way of saying, this is what happens when you defy us. You're nobody. The crucified, they were stripped naked. They were nailed to wood. They were displayed along highways like a billboard, mocked by passers-by. It was the kind of death that Rome reserved for slaves and insurrectionists and, well, nobodies. And so, when early Christians claimed that this man, crucified between two thieves, was the Son of God, that was an outrageous claim. It was laughable. The one who claimed to be the Son of God dies a godless death. See, to Roman minds, the cross cut the victim off from all sympathy, all hope, all dignity. To Jewish minds, it was cursed. Deuteronomy 21:23, cursed is the man hung from a tree. To Gentiles, this claim was beyond absurd, because the claim was this, that may look like a cross of shame, but that, the Christians said, is their Lord's very coronation and enthronement. Jesus, he didn't get crowned with gold, but with thorns, John 19:2. He didn't sit on a royal chair, but was lifted up on a Roman cross, John 12:32. The soldiers mocked him by calling him King of the Jews. But what they meant as sarcasm, it turned out to be the truth, John 19:19. He was, in that very moment of pain and shame, crowned King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Here's what Paul says in Philippians 2. He describes Jesus, how he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. In other words, the road to the crown went through the cross. It wasn't a detour. It was the plan from the very foundation of the world. When Jesus was crucified, he wasn't being conquered, do you see? He was conquering. Colossians 2:15 says, having disarmed the powers and the authorities, he made public spectacles of them, triumphing over them by the cross. What looked like defeat was really a victory parade. The cross wasn't the end of the story. It was the coronation of the king. Listen once more to the words that Mark read for us from the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 1:18. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Not wisdom, not elegance, not logic, foolishness. And yet to attain its glory, Christians made that their boast. Not their social programs, not their good deeds of mercy like Good Samaritans, not their eloquent preaching or well-spoken theologians. They made the cross the center thing. You know, one of the earliest images that survive of the crucifixion is not a painting that you'd find in a church. It's a graffiti, or technically a graffito, right? It's a graffiti sign scratched into a Roman wall that shows a man with the body of a man but the head of a donkey, a jackass. And he's stretched out on the cross. And the inscription below it says, Alexamenos worships his God. See, to the Romans it was a joke. To the ancient world, the idea of a crucified God, that's obscene, preposterous, a contradiction in terms. And yet this is what the church proclaimed, not with shame, but with defiance. You see, they dared to say, the crucified one is Lord. The punchline of your joke is Lord of all, not Caesar, not Herod, not Pilate. The humiliated man, his tortured body, he's Lord. And with that proclamation, the New Testament says that they turned the world upside down. Because in the very place where God seemed most absent, he was most present. The cross, the shame, the foolishness, the joke became our boast. To the world, it looks like defeat, but to us who believe, it's the very power that saves. And that's the mystery of the cross. It's not what anybody expected. It's not what anybody would have chosen. But it's exactly what we needed. And here's the beautiful, sobering truth here. The cross redeems all of us because, let's face it, the best most of us hope for is for a dignified death. But even, let's be honest, that seems a little out of reach because deep down, each of us knows that our lives, if we're honest, have been something of a ridiculous joke. Stumble around trying to make something of ourselves, trying to do good. But like Paul says in Romans chapter 7, I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Anybody relate? Well, we carry noble intentions in our hearts, don't we? But we trip over ourselves at every step. We make resolutions, or we offer apologies, or we make vows to do better, and still we fall flat. Think of it, even the way our bodies are made tell this story. Why would God give us one hand that's capable of being precise? I can thread a needle, I can sign my name, but then he saddles me with this other hand that can barely butter toast. One hand writes a poem, the other smears the ink. That's what it feels like to be human, isn't it? Part glory, part clumsy. Part image of God and part dust of the earth. And yet we walk around with polished exteriors, pretending like we've got it all together. And Jesus calls people like that whitewashed tombs. Clean on the outside, but inside full of contradictions. And the older you get, I think I'm getting old enough that I can say this. The older you get, the more you realize that the brokenness of the world's not out there, but in here. That's why the cross of Christ isn't just Christ's throne, it's our rescue. Because the same Jesus who wore a crown of thorns now offers us a crown of life, James 1:12. That the same arms that were stretched wide now stretched wide and welcome. The blood that soaked the ground beneath the dirt of Calvary, the blood that covers our shame. He didn't die for just priests and kings. He died for people like us. People who can't quite live up to our own standards, much less God's. People who are painfully aware of the joke we've become. Desperate for somebody who can rewrite the punchline. Let me see if I can put it this way. The King of Glory died in dirty underwear to rescue the rest of us from the laughter of shame. That's the mystery of the cross. He takes all the absurdity, all the contradictions, the hypocrisy, the sin, the shame, and he nails it to the cross. And he buries it in the tomb. And 3 days later, when he walks out of that grave, he leaves it all behind. Let me see if I can put this in a way that'll stick. A few years ago, I remember I was standing in a funeral parlor doing a family visitation before a funeral that I was supposed to be preaching the next day. It was for a man who I loved and respected, and he had served as an elder in the church for nearly 30 years. John. You remember John. He had a wonderful sense of humor. Now, he was a child of the South, and he confessed to me once that he'd grown up deeply, deeply prejudiced. But he loved the Lord, and he took the commands of the gospel seriously. In fact, with his own two hands, he led the building of an orphanage and a refuge for battered women run by the church where he served in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And when that orphanage couldn't handle all the needs, he and his wife, they would take children into their own homes to foster. And one of the children they eventually fostered was a toddler who was abandoned to the state in the 1970s, a boy with a Vietnamese mother and an African-American father. And John told me that it was rocking that baby to sleep in his arms that he learned, in his words, that brown sugar tastes just as sweet. That was an important lesson for him to learn because his daughter moved to Virginia and married a black man, and that gave him 3 mixed-race grandchildren of his own who he loved and revered, and he raised in the fear and admonition of the Lord. But anyway, at the funeral home there, John lay in repose. His casket was in a niche on one side of the room, but on the other side of the room, John's grandsons, they stood huddled together, and they started cracking up, belly laughing, like the greatest joke had ever just been told. And I'll admit, when they started laughing, part of me was a little annoyed. I thought, don't you know what kind of place this is? Don't you know this is serious? Treat your granddad with some respect. But the longer I was there, the more I realized they did know. They knew exactly where they were. And they knew exactly what kind of man their grandfather was. A man who was in on the joke with Jesus. See, their laughter wasn't a denial. It was defiance. Remembering one of Granddad's pranks. And that laughter comes from people who've seen hard things, faced hard days, but still believe that love has the last word. John, he had survived the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl and the Korean War and even 2 years of my preaching. The cross isn't the end of the story. You know that. Jesus really did rise from the grave, and when he did, he laughed in the face of death. Psalm 2 says, the one enthroned in the heavens laughs. Not because he's callous, but because he sees the whole picture and he knows the punchline. You see, the devil tried to throw the ultimate insult, and God turned it into an invitation for people like John and people like you and people like me. What does that mean for us? Well, first it means this, that we've been freed from having to take ourselves so seriously. You've never been saved by your own performance. You never will be. God didn't pick you because you were impressive or because he was omniscient and, he knew that you were wearing clean underwear. He picked you because he loves you. The cross puts us all on level playing ground. The preacher in the pulpit, the addict in rehab, the kid in detention, the civil servant in his corner office. We all come the same way. There's no boasting in any of our goodness. That's why Christians can smile even when we mess up. Not because sin's funny, but because mercy's real. And grace is inexhaustible because the tomb's empty. Christians, we're filled with a kind of joy because we know the joke's not on us anymore. Second, it means we don't have to be afraid to die. Jesus died the worst kind of death. Exposed, humiliated, mocked. And yet God used that to bring salvation to the world. If God can do that with that, what are you afraid of? Our own ridiculous deaths, they've been redeemed. I'm not saying death isn't hard. It is. It is. But what I'm saying is we're not alone. Jesus walks with us into the darkest place, even into death, and he comes out on the other side holding the keys. I don't know how I'm going to die, and neither do you. But one of the great ironies of the early church is that the first Christians didn't pray to die quietly in their sleep. The earliest believers asked for something entirely different. They prayed not to escape death, but that they'd see it coming. That they'd meet it head on. That they'd face it gallantly. Why? Because they realized that even their death belongs to God. Romans 14:7-9 says, we do not live to ourselves, and we do not die to ourselves. If we live unto the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, so that he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. See, they understood what we so often forget, and that's that life, in all of its stages, even in its final breath, is an offering, a gift. They wanted the chance to set their houses in order, to reconcile, to bless, to bear witnesses, and to die as they lived in the shape of the cross. See, death for them was a final sermon, a last gesture of surrender, the culmination of discipleship. They didn't fear death because the crucified Christ had gone there first. And they didn't fear any type of death either, getting fed to lions or being burned at the stake. After all, they worshiped a crucified king. They'd seen him die, not in a bed with linens and morphine running through his veins, but stretched out on wood, spit on and pierced and mocked and left exposed. And they knew a disciple is not above his master. That's why they didn't ask to be spared from it. They asked to be faithful in it. In fact, according to church history, when the Apostle Peter was sentenced to crucifixion, he asked the guards to be crucified upside down because he felt unworthy to obtain to the glory of the cross of Christ. They didn't ask for an exemption. Rather, they prayed that they would meet death with clarity and courage so that their dying breath would be like Christ, not to gasp in fear, but to trust and say, Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit. And I know this, I'd rather die in dirty underwear with Jesus than in clean underwear without him. Third, and finally, the cross teaches us how to live. Maybe the best way I can say it is this: it teaches us to die to the joke so that we can live set free. See, the joke, the cosmic one, is that we thought we could save ourselves, that we could be our own gods, that power and polish and prestige would give us worth, but the resurrection is God's roaring laughter in the face of that lie. He who sits in the heavens laughs, not at us, but for our joy, because his plan worked, because love wins, because death couldn't keep him, and so now by faith we get to be in on the joke. Baptism's like that, isn't it? Romans 6 says we're buried with Christ in baptism. That is, we die with him so we can rise with him. We let go of our pride. We admit we're not the hero of the story after all. We get in the water and come out with new names, a new hope, a new life. And every time someone gets baptized, I smile because I know what they're doing. They're stepping into the story. They're letting go of the old punchline. They're grabbing hold of the joy that can never be taken from them. You see, it's an inside joke for people who used to be on outside. And today, maybe that's the invitation. If you're tired of carrying your contradictions, if you're ready to let go of the pressure to perform, maybe you've been trying to impress, maybe you've been scared of death, maybe you've been living like the joke is on you. The cross says different. It says you're loved. You're not alone. You're invited. There's still room for you at the foot of the cross. So come on in. The joke's been rewritten, and here's the best part. You already know the punchline. Jesus Christ is Lord. Amen.